Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. So in this video we will be talking about Blackwater Sister by Zen Cho. So Zen Cho is one of those Malaysian authors that I am genuinely excited to see what she has in store. I've had sessions with her a couple of times and she's really great, and I really like the ideas that she comes out so far. I mean, not everything that she produced I am in love with, but they are definitely not bad, and in fact I think she has some really great ideas. So the story is about Jess, who returns to Malaysia with her family after years of settling in the US. She is then haunted by the ghost of her dead grandma and must finish her unfinished business. As a result of this, she would sometimes get possessed by a supernatural entity called the Blackwater Sister and becomes female John Wick for a few minutes. However, if you're expecting like an action movie, then you'll be disappointed because she blacks out when she's possessed and only comes to when she realized that she kicked a lot of ass. So in order to settle her problems and get her life in control, she needs to work together with her sassy, bitter grandma, a wild spirit, as well as a possible enemy, so she can get back to her normal life, adjusting and readjusting to Malaysia and embracing her queer identity, as well as unveiling a family secret. So I did attend Zen Cho book talk at LitBooks.
I don't know how to allocate these books, but I did bring 4 copies of actually quite rare books of mine.
You want to do a quiz later?
Yeah, maybe do a quiz. Yeah. You get a card. Yeah.
And I managed to score the front row seats and recorded the whole session. So yay.
Zen was the one who emailed us to tell us that she was coming home. Our distributors told us that other bookstores complained to them, like, why do authors only go to LitBooks? And I'm like, that's not true. So what happens with author events is sometimes we approach the authors. Sometimes the distributors are the one who says, so and so and so is coming, would you like to host them? Or sometimes author writes in and goes, hi, by the way, I'm coming home. So anyway, so thanks for that.
I'm not always lucky at LitBooks. So my seating was totally perfect because it was like clear in the front row, but it is not too close that I feel like I'm imposing on her. I will put the links to the session at LitBooks in the description if you want to check it out. Apparently she has other novels as well. One of them is actually 2 of them is a duology, which is Sorcerer to the Crown and The True Queen. I tried to finish them, but so far I've been DNFing it. I do have every intention to finish it, but let's just say that Blackwater Sister is definitely her best so far. Prior to this, she wrote a lot of novellas and short stories. I think part of my lack of enjoyment to the Sorcerer duology is the abundance of politics involved in it, and it feels like she's trying to just tick a lot of boxes in the PC depiction.
The complexity of Sorcerer to the Crown, right, is partly because I didn't really know what I was doing. It was my debut novel, right? It's like it's like a book where it's set in like 1800s England. They're all wearing like like breeches or like ball gowns, and they're like balls, and they're like hitting each other on the shoulder with a fan, and all that stuff. I love that stuff. From the prejudice and the rest. And then I was like, there's gonna be dragons and magic because I love that stuff, And then I was like, but then like he's gonna be black, she's gonna be like Indian, so it's gonna be all this stuff, colonialism. And then I was like, And then also it's gonna be fictional Malay Island, Malay Island, and that's gonna be the core of the like conflict, which is that this is quite complicated to describe.
It's just too many, and it just feels really ham-fisted. When it comes to these kind of issues, I'm a firm believer that it needs to be handled with care. There's no point to put everything all at once. Even Zen Cho herself admit that her previous duology just feels really jumbled.
So I think when I was growing up reading all these English novels, I always had this like sense of like inferiority as a result, where it's like, wow, I'm really like shaped by British culture, but like Britain doesn't know anything about me, right? I was just like throwing all these things in because I was like, shit, I don't know if I can write that long, so like I just have to keep like putting something more stuff in, so like to keep the story going. It's very convoluted. I wouldn't recommend it.
Apparently, but however, the idea for Blackwater Sister actually sparked when she was writing the Sorcerer duology.
And when I was writing them, I spent a lot of time on the Oxford English Dictionary online. So one of the words I came across when I was doing this was the word hag-ridden, which means basically stressed. That also has a literal meaning of, being ridden by a hag or a witch. It's such an evocative word, and when I came across the word, I immediately had this image of a young woman who was being ridden around by, her horrible relatives, basically, her horrible ancestors.
I also heard that this book, The Blackwater Sister, is closer to her locally published books in terms of writing style. I haven't read them, but knowing what I know now, I'm really excited about it. And considering I really like the overall vibe of this book. So Blackwater Sister deals with supernatural conflict, family conflict, preservation of culture and family values, intergenerational trauma, all in a straightforward but tongue-in-cheek way. It is very easily digestible.
It does touch on, or it does weave in things like urban development versus preservation of heritage sites, of course gentrification, and of course the plight of women, like the Blackwater Sister, what she had to endure, Amma to a certain extent as well, and all that. Do these themes come to you organically, or do you plot them? How does this work?
Yeah, they're quite organic. I'm not a theme-driven writer so much.
It is also very well paced. It's a very vibrant, like the cover, and I highly recommend you get this cover because I think this is a much better cover. It has another style. I don't like that cover that much. I just feel like it's a bit boring. I find that the main character, Jess, is a very fun character to follow. I love how Zen Cho made her returning to Malaysia, so that learning about a lot of the cultural references doesn't feel awkward or unnatural because it has a lot of the cultural references.
So you made her an outsider in several ways, right? First, she is a transplant. She grew up in America. And of course, second, she is queer in a very conservative Asian setting.
I think Zen is still trying to give it a global flavor to it that, non-Malaysians can even enjoy them. So if you're lost, don't worry, because Jess is a character that you can follow in with her journey of learning / relearning about her own culture.
My editor did say to me, she said, you're going to lose some readers if you don't explain. So you suggested maybe you should do a glossary, or maybe you should footnote it, or maybe you should explain it. I actually posted on Facebook and asked people as well, and I said specifically I was interested in Malaysian's kind of point of view, because a lot of the feedback was look, we all grew up reading Enid Blyton, Agatha Christie, whatever it is, and they never explained what tongue sandwiches were, or whatever it was. So, and we managed. So why can't they manage? But there definitely is pressure. There is pressure to kind of file the edges of your kind of voice and so on, make things easier, because this is kind of imagined lowest common denominator they're trying to target. But my view is that kind of person is not going to read my book anyway, right? When you kind of italicize it, you put a glossary, right? You're making an implied statement about who is the audience for this book, and it's really important to me that that it should be the implied audience should be somebody like me who would kind of understand all those terms.
And if you're actually clever, you can tell that the title is actually a translation of Kakak Air Hitam. Air Hitam. Air Hitam is a place in Penang, refers to the goddess or deity that the grandma is serving.
The Blackwater Sister is not real. I made her up. Just everyone. But she's based on a real god. Di Bernardi talks about a ghost who is said to haunt a certain house in Penang, and she's called the Blackwater Aunt. And she eats people. So it's very funny because I ended up corresponding with Di Bernardi because she saw the news about Blackwater Sister. And she emailed me. She said, I said to myself, that's my god. What was the question?
In a way, Blackwater Sister is a parallel journey of two women from two generations and two different times in Malaysia. The grandma has this deep bitterness to her due to her hard life and the vengeance that is born from it, combined with Jess' sassiness inherited from her maternal side of the family, as well as her confusion in reconciling who she really is after years of living in a place that never truly accepted her, and then suddenly forced out of it due to survival.
Usually a story that grips me enough to be written in long form, I mean, it has kind of two components. So one is kind of a relationship I want to explore, and in this kind of, they're often kind of odd couples. The couple is obviously Jess and her grandmother, who are from very different worlds and interact in kind of very different ways. And then the other piece is something like about the world or like history that feels quite personal, but I don't fully understand it.
In fact, the opening line actually perfectly describes her situation. The first thing the ghost said to Jess was, "Does your mother know you're a pengkid?" Now, if you're a non-Malaysian, you must be wondering what a pengkid is and why does it sound like a slur, which it kind of is.
Because we started debating among ourselves, like, what is it in Cantonese? What is it in Hokkien? And then all of us said that, and went, okay, we're also bananas to be fair. So we're also like, actually don't know.
Well, I did some research, right? I'm also a banana, so it's very hard to do research.
And for Malaysian, you already sense the incoming tension because you understand the consequences of our main character's parents finding out, considering Malaysia is still quite conservative. And even though this scene happened when Jess was still in the US, when you're Asian everywhere, even at the most liberal country. At the same time, we also know that the question comes from a supernatural entity. And apparently in the beginning part of Jess' life is inspired by Zen Cho's real life experience.
You know, I guess because I had this kind of history from coming back from America to Malaysia, although I was 8 years old at the time, so I had a different experience.
It is actually really clever how she is forced to adjust and readjust to life in Malaysia after years of living in the US. And this is also how Jess has to deal with her own banana-ness. And it also deals with the conflict and the ironic nature of a family situation. For Malaysians, if you live abroad, the immediate assumption is that you are rich or you probably won't be back at all. However, Jess and her family moved to the US for a better life, only to be stuck with a huge obstacle when they were there because Jess's father got sick. And with the US healthcare system, we all know how it works.
They have to be from America because if you got cancer, the medical bills would not destroy you financially to the same degree if you were living in the UK with the NHS and so on versus if you're living in America.
Curing him drove the family close to bankruptcy, so they're forced to abandon their American dream and move back to their relatives to work with the family business. They have to swallow their pride because in some families, when you move out of the country, it almost feels like a betrayal. Even if your family know and support your decision, there's always this feeling that you're leaving yourself behind. So essentially, Jess and her parents essentially comes back to Malaysia with the tail between their legs and embarrassed about their pursuit of the American dream.
We moved around quite a lot, and I think like when that happens, it almost generates these like alternate universes where you're kind of like, oh, what if we'd stayed in America, or what if like I hadn't moved to the UK at this age, or what if we'd stayed in Penang, right? As in the book, my dad kind of struggled to get a job, but then there were more opportunities in KL, so we started kind of going back and forth. And then my family made the other decision, which is to kind of go back and stay together as a family rather than, and that I would say that really worked out for my family. So it was kind of easy to kind of branching off and kind of go back then and say, okay, what if the other thing happened?
Also, I forgot to mention that Jess graduated from Harvard and she's unemployed. So yeah, that's also like double the embarrassment. Like when people say that, oh, you graduated from a top university, people expect you to get great jobs, high paying jobs, but
well, how the turntables.
So really, because of all of that, they're facing a little bit of skepticism from the family. Although, minor spoilers ahead, the family actually ended up being not bad at all, which is actually a nice twist. It is just simply the standard Asian nosiness, but never really with malicious intent. I mean, like as an Asian, we all experience this sometimes with a random uncle. I experienced this so much with my family that I just give up. But Blackwater Sister offers the solution that it is all about understanding the differences and reconcile with it. Of course, along with better communication, it helps a lot. And unfortunately with us, we really suck at the heart-to-heart department. I mean, even in my family, even despite my mom being one of the most blunt person that I know, which means she hides absolutely nothing, it's still hard because she's a good speaker, she's a terrible listener. So yeah, true story. So Blackwater Sister basically says if we communicate better, then we would realize that we're actually not so different at all. Same goes between Jess and her grandmother. Despite their generational difference, they're actually from the same blood and they have the same nature and the same temperament. Like in real life, older generation like Boomer or Gen X keep saying how millennials like me, and I think Jess is also a millennial, had it easy with, and also dismissing whatever difficulties that we have, and also ignoring that they, i.e. the older generation, had a hand in the way we turned up, since they are our parents and our older siblings. And younger generation don't just fall from the sky, we have someone from the older generation who nurtured and raised us. So if we turned out whatever it is that you criticize us for, I think you guys also play a hand in that, just saying.
So she felt quite real to me once I started writing, but the way I came up with her will sound quite mechanistic. What kind of person would this be really terrible for, right? So, like, if you take someone like, say, my sister, she's a very straightforward person. She tells everyone everything she's thinking. She's confided everything she's ever felt and thought to my dad, who she's very close to. Like, for her, having, my dad or my mom or my grandparents in her head wouldn't be that stressful. It would be a bit stressful, but not that stressful. Okay, in an Asian family, what is it? What's the unspeakable? What's the big secret? And obviously, being queer is one of these kind of big kind of unspeakables.
Talking about the family conflict, I find it really effective since we're following Jess's POV. So it is essentially, of course, first-person POV is really biased and flawed. We will gravitate towards doubting the family, thinking that they're taking advantage of Jess's father by making him do manual labor. But it turns out the father actually really genuinely enjoys his job. He was sick for a very long time, so it is really refreshing for him to do something outdoorsy. Even Jess's father mentioned that the family actually give him more than enough salary to support his family, and she learns to understand and accept her family's nosiness. In this case, the nosiness genuinely means concern. And I really think that this is very beautiful how the story comes in full circle. The writing is great, not too flowery, not too say simple. Sure, it's not as flowery as Rani Manika or anything, but definitely when it comes to pacing and characterization, it's really good. Since this book has a minor touch in the LGBT aspect, I really appreciate that it takes a back seat, because too many stories these days just focus on political agendas rather than actual storytelling. And of course, this book also falls in the supernatural genre, so naturally it will touch about the relationship between humans and our spiritual counterparts.
And then the other half of the inspiration came from a book by Professor Jean DiBernardi, who's a professor at the University of Alberta, and it's called The Way That Lives in the Heart. And I had kind of grown up around this religious tradition without necessarily understanding much about it. It's like it provides an intellectual framework for all these beliefs I grew up around. And I knew particularly I wanted to write a book exploring spirit mediumship and kind of what happens there, and kind of taking it as something that actually happens, right?
And I love the many references of the Malaysian ghosts and Malaysian spirits and folklore, like Datuk Kong and Monkey King, as well as how it feels ingrained in our culture, almost like an extended family member. Our boy Kong is different. Our boy Kong is a god. People pray to our boy Kong to keep them out. What is our boy Kong? Says Jess. The god at the back? Yes, a god. Sits by the back door there, protecting the house. Good things come in from the front one, ma, right? From the back, it's all the not so good things, the floating things. You need a guardian to protect you from them. Our boy Kong is the guardian. Some people call the other things our boy Kong also. Nicer to say. Could be. People give different names. Some say Hotiati, means the same thing. people call ghosts good brothers. Yeah, so and it also highlights how some people are just special. Just like how millennials are kind of like mentioned as the in-between generations, where we experience both pre-digital era and digital era. Essentially, we are experiencing the best of both worlds. And Jess is thrown in the new Malaysia, the digital world, the modern world. There's also a lot of references to how hipster and how creative our culture is, as well as the supernatural world inherited from her grandmother's affiliation with the Blackwater sister. When you are in between, not here, not there, you are more likely to attract these things. You got feel or not something following you? But like I mentioned with the grandmother's bitterness, the grandma and the Blackwater sister also represents the intergenerational trauma that is ultimately affecting Jess's life. While Jess is really genuinely the MC, the real intergenerational trauma was actually between Jess's mother and grandmother. And I will not spoil it for you, but Jess's mom had a rough childhood, and that is why she's very estranged with her mother. And with Jess's involvement, she essentially is a middle person, having both the women in her life reconcile with their past. She uses this, her new fresh outlook on life, and she's contrasting her grandmother's anger and her mother's sadness, and she's helping them move on as a middle person, as well as herself having a newfound appreciation towards the culture that gave birth to her and made her who she is, because she comes from a line of a very strong woman, and she herself is ultimately inherited those same strengths.
I want to write about this relationship between Jess and her grandmother, and like to have them be very contrasted. Jess is very highly educated. She went to Harvard. She's got like a lot of privilege. She is valued. Her parents think it's important that she's happy. And whereas like Amma, she was born in an age in a kind of society where like girls are pretty useless. She didn't have an education. She gets married very young to an abusive husband. And then the gentrification stuff also was quite natural in the sense that when I first started writing the story, it was just like the tension between Jess and Amma. But I also knew that I wanted them to team up at some point. And so the Blackwater sister, which ironically became the title of the book, right? She developed, like she wasn't kind of part of the concept originally. And then if you have a goddess, like what's she mad about? Well, one of the commonest thing for a god to be mad about in modern Malaysia is that their temple is getting developed, right? And then this being Malaysia, there's always a story is like, oh, the place is super haunted because like you pissed off the spirits, like, right? So like kind of classic story to include.
There are many characters here, but I don't want this video to be too long. So I would like to highlight one character, which is Ang Wei Sheng, which is one of the most fascinating characters in here. Again, I would like to mention that, we follow things from Jess's perspective, but there are a lot of things that are up for our imagination. And without spoiling anything, let's just say that he is the son of a famous businessman that ended up working with Jess to solve this family stuff. You can tell that he has feelings for Jess, but it was never explicitly mentioned. I love that Sheng's affiliation either towards his family or Jess's friendship, it remains a mystery, and rightfully so, since we are after all reading from Jess's perspective. This ambiguity actually makes him more refreshing and intriguing, because I really throughout watching this story, I really can't predict what he's gonna do. So anyway, I recommend this book. Since this book is set in Penang and depicts the melting pot of culture there, I would also recommend going to place referred to this book, like the temple and also the nasi dalcha. Anyway, that is all from me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.
I left for the UK in 2004, so it's now been 19 years since I last lived in Malaysia full time, right? And I've come back regularly, and there was a period when I lived here for 6 months after that, but I've lived most of my life in the UK now, so I think it's hard for me to write a book that's like set in Malaysia with the kind of like convincingness that it would have if I was based here, right? So I gotta find other ways of like connecting with. I'm sure there's always going to be some element of Malaysianness in my books, but it's got to be in a different way.
So you mentioned that your next one is a departure. Can you talk about that? About going away from
Yeah, it's hard to. I can't really talk too much about it because we're still like. So I try to think like how I can. Basically, right, I just got really into K-drama straight. I needed something that was totally escapist. I needed something that was totally escapist. And then I thought, this is great. What a great genre. Like they're combining like, you've got like some of this pretty, thoughtful, but then it's really tropey, and I really like the romances. And I thought, what if I write a K-drama, but it has like Southeast Asian characters, and it's set in London? So that's what it is.
Okay, great. Thank you.